The first sign that the world had tilted on its axis was the glint of chrome in the late afternoon sun, a familiar silver curve that had no business being there. I saw it from 100 yards away as I turned onto the quiet, tree-lined street where my son, Mark, and his wife, Amelia, lived. It was parked just beyond their gate, tucked behind a sprawling azalea bush as if in hiding. But there was no hiding that specific shade of silver blue, the custom color Eleanor had chosen for a 1988 Mercedes 560 SL, a car I had personally overseen being placed into climate-controlled storage 3 months prior, a task that had felt like closing a book I was not yet ready to finish. My foot eased off the accelerator, the engine of my own car dropping to a low hum. Confusion was a mild, inadequate word for the cold knot tightening in my stomach. It was a feeling akin to finding a structural flaw in a completed building, a deep, instinctual wrongness that defied the blueprints of reality as I understood them. I parked 2 houses down, my mind a flurry of benign, rational explanations, each one dissolving as soon as it formed. Perhaps Mark had taken it out for a drive, to keep the engine from seizing. A thoughtful gesture, yet he had not mentioned it. Amelia might have arranged for a specialist mechanic to look it over at their home. Also plausible, but again, the silence was jarring. My relationship with my son had been strained by the static of grief since Eleanor's passing 6 months ago, but a matter concerning his mother's most prized possession would surely have warranted a call. I killed the engine and sat in the sudden quiet, the leather of the seat creaking under my weight. The plan had been simple: a surprise visit, a bottle of decent wine in the passenger's seat, an attempt to breach the silent gulf that had opened between us. Now, a new plan was forming, one dictated by an architect's caution. Before entering a structure you suspect is unsound, you first inspect its foundation from the outside. I got out of the car, leaving the wine behind, and walked slowly toward their house. The neighborhood was peaceful, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and jasmine. It was a facade of tranquility that did little to soothe the dissonance humming under my skin. As I drew closer, I noted that the window to the ground floor study, Mark's home office, was cracked open an inch. Voices drifted out, faint but distinct in the stillness. Mark's familiar cadence and Amelia's sharper, more precise tone. I veered off the sidewalk, stepping onto the soft grass of their lawn, my movements feeling clandestine, shameful. I justified it as a father's concern, but a darker, colder motive was already taking root. I was not a concerned father. I was an investigator arriving at a scene. I stopped by the azalea bush, its thick leaves providing ample cover, and angled my head toward the open window. The fragments of their conversation solidified into coherent, horrifying sentences. The final paperwork from Dr. Evans will be ready by Tuesday, Amelia was saying, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. It was the voice she used for her paralegal work, a tool of professional detachment. He's corroborating our timeline. The memory lapses after the funeral, the incident with the foundation account last month. It all paints a clear picture of diminished capacity, my breath caught in my throat. The foundation account. I had transferred a large sum to a charitable trust in Eleanor's name. Mark had questioned it. A brief, tense phone call where he had called it financially reckless. I had dismissed it as the clumsy concern of a son who did not understand philanthropy. I had been wrong. It was not concern. It was reconnaissance. And his lawyer? Mark asked. His voice was tight with a nervous energy that I now recognized, not as anxiety, but as avarice. What if he fights it? Callahan has been with him for 30 years. I heard the rustle of paper. Callahan is old school, Amelia replied, her confidence a sharp, metallic thing. He'll see a grieving, confused old man being taken advantage of by charities and a loving son stepping in to protect his father's legacy. We frame it as a conservatorship for his own good. We control the assets, the firm, everything. We protect it for him. The word protect was a grotesque perversion, a poison dart wrapped in silk. Then came the words that shattered the last vestiges of my denial. Once we have control, Mark said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we can finally sell the firm. Liquidate his holdings. We'll be set. Mom would have wanted him to be looked after. The mention of his mother was a profanity that sent a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage through me. My hand, trembling, found my phone in my pocket. My thumb, clumsy with shock, fumbled to find a voice memo application. I pressed record, holding the device steady. My arm braced against the rough bark of a nearby oak tree. I needed this. I needed the blueprint of their treason. The conversation continued, a meticulous and chilling recitation of their strategy. They spoke of my grief not as a wound to be healed, but as a resource to be exploited. They discussed forging my signature on documents, of leveraging my recent emotional distance from my daughter, Sarah, to isolate me further. They talked about Eleanor's car, the Mercedes. Amelia had retrieved it from storage using a forged authorization, planning to sell it through a private dealer to generate cash for their legal fees. It was all there, a detailed step-by-step plan for the demolition of my life, narrated by my only son and the woman I had welcomed as a daughter. I stood there, rooted to the spot for what felt like an eternity, the phone in my hand capturing every venomous syllable, every casual betrayal, until they moved on to discussing dinner plans. Their monstrous work for the day apparently concluded. I stopped the recording, the silence that followed more deafening than their words. The file saved with a small, innocuous chime. Proof. The foundation. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, the world around me seeming thin and unreal, a set of architectural drawings that could be torn to pieces at any moment. I did not drive home. Instead, I drove to a park overlooking the city, a project I had consulted on a decade ago, and I listened to the recording. I listened to it 3 times, the initial shock giving way to a glacial cold. The emotional response was there, a howling storm of grief and betrayal. But my mind, the part of me that designed structures to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes, was already walling it off. Emotion was a liability. It was a flaw in the material. What was required now was logic, precision, and an unyielding, dispassionate strategy. They had drawn up their plans. Now I would draw up mine. My first move had to be a feint, a test of their defenses. I drove back to their house an hour later, the sun now low in the sky, casting long shadows that mirrored the duplicity of the day. I walked to the front door, the bottle of wine now in my hand, a prop in the theater of my new reality. I rang the bell, composing my features into a mask of weary, paternal affection. Mark opened the door, his face a study in manufactured surprise. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Amelia appeared behind him, her smile wide and bright. It did not reach her eyes. "Arthur, what a lovely surprise. We were just about to eat." I held up the wine. "I was in the neighborhood," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic shifts within me. "Thought I'd see how you two were doing." They ushered me in, the air thick with their fall solicitude. I let them guide me to the kitchen, making small talk about my day, about the firm. I was an actor on a stage, playing the part of the man I had been that morning. A grieving but functional father, slightly lost, perhaps a little lonely. As Amelia bustled with plates, I glanced toward the study. "Working late, Mark?" I asked casually. He followed my gaze. "Just catching up on some emails," he lied. His own business, a series of failed tech startups funded largely by me, required little more than wishful thinking. The real work was happening in that room, the plotting of my downfall. I then played my first card. On my way in, I began, my tone light. I thought I saw Eleanor's Mercedes parked down the street. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat. A silly trick of the light, I suppose. I watched them closely. Mark's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Amelia, however, was a master of her craft. She turned from the counter, a look of perfect innocence on her face. "Oh, that. We should have told you," she said, her voice a symphony of thoughtful concern. "We were worried about it just sitting in storage, Dad. We had it brought here to have a specialist look it over, make sure it's being properly maintained. We were going to surprise you next week, have it detailed and running perfectly. The lie was seamless, well-rehearsed. It was designed to preempt any suspicion, to transform a deceitful act into a loving gesture." I nodded slowly, playing my part. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said, letting a flicker of contrived emotion show. Thank you. They exchanged a look of triumphant relief, believing their deception had held. They had no idea they were not looking at a grieving father, but at a structural engineer who had just identified the first hairline fracture in their facade. Before I left, after enduring an hour of their cloying company, I stood at the doorway and delivered the second, subtler blow. You know, I said, looking back towards the study. The window was open when I first drove by. The acoustics on this street are strange. You could probably hear a conversation from that room, clear as day out on the lawn. You should be more careful. I did not wait for a response. I just smiled, turned, and walked away, leaving them to contemplate the chilling possibility that their fortress was made of glass. The drive home was a journey through a foreign country. The house, the one Eleanor and I had built together, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a museum of a life I now understood I had not fully perceived. Every photograph on the mantelpiece was a potential exhibit in the case against my son. There he was at his graduation, beaming, his arm around me, a celebration I had paid for. There we were on a family vacation, a trip he had complained was too rustic, too far from the city. I saw him now not as my son, but as a project I had mismanaged from the start, a design flawed from its inception. I walked through the quiet rooms, the silence amplifying the echo of the recorded betrayal. Her perfume still lingered in the closet, a ghost of a memory now tainted. Had she seen it? Had Eleanor, in her final months, understood the nature of our son's ambition, the coldness in his heart? There had been hints, fragments of conversation I had dismissed. She had once remarked that Mark loved the idea of the family firm more than the work of architecture itself, that Amelia was frightfully organized about their finances. I had seen these as observations. Now I understood they had been warnings. Sleep was an impossibility. The night was a long, dark corridor of reassessment. Grief, that raw, gaping wound, began to scar over, hardening into something else. It was the process of curing concrete, the volatile, liquid emotion slowly solidifying under pressure into a substance that was cold, hard, and immensely strong. Anger. It was a clean, pure anger, stripped of the messy complexities of sorrow. They had mistaken my grief for weakness. They had viewed my love as a resource to be plundered. They had presumed my age equated to obsolescence. It was a profound, and soon to be a fatal miscalculation. My mind, which had spent a lifetime conceptualizing and executing complex designs, turned its full attention to a new, singular project, the complete and systematic deconstruction of Mark and Amelia's lives. They had provided me with their blueprints, after all. By dawn, my home office had been transformed. The drafting table, which had held the plans for civic centers and art galleries, was cleared. In its place, I laid out every financial document I possessed, bank statements, investment portfolios, trust agreements, deeds. My personal and corporate lives were intertwined, a complex structure I had built over 40 years. It was a fortress, and they were trying to tunnel in through a sewer pipe. It was time to seal the entrances and flood the tunnels. My first call was to David Callahan, my lawyer. I did not play him the recording, not yet. The timing for that revelation had to be perfect. Instead, I presented a carefully constructed narrative. David, I said, my voice calm and authoritative, I'm initiating a full security review of all my assets. Effective immediately, I want you to draw up documents to revoke all existing powers of attorney and freeze any joint accounts I hold with my son. He was surprised, but, knowing my methodical nature, he did not question the order, only the impetus. Is everything all right, Arthur? I paused. Let's just say I'm shoring up the foundations before a predicted storm. My next calls were to my private banker and my chief financial officer at the firm. The instructions were the same. Lock it all down. Change passwords. Add new security protocols. Flag any inquiry from Mark or Amelia for my personal, immediate attention. They were to be cut off, cleanly and silently. By noon, the digital walls had been erected. The flow of capital they had grown accustomed to, the subtle subsidies for their lifestyle, the easy access to lines of credit guaranteed by my name, had been severed. The final preparatory step was to hire a private investigator. David recommended a man named Peterson, a former financial crimes detective known for his discretion and his thoroughness. I met him that afternoon in a neutral location, a quiet corner of my club. I tasked him with a deep dive into Amelia's professional life and Mark's financial history. I need to know where all their liabilities are, I told him. Debt, professional complaints, disgruntled partners. Every point of leverage. I am not interested in gossip. I am interested in structural weaknesses, he nodded, his expression unreadable, and promised a preliminary report within 72 hours. The first tremor from their side came less than a day later. It was a text from Mark. Dad, my credit card was declined at the grocery store. Embarrassing. Is something wrong with the joint account? I waited an hour before replying. That's odd. I'll look into it. The next day, the call came. He was frantic. Dad, what the hell is going on? Amelia's card was declined, too. The bank says the account is frozen on your instruction. His voice was a mixture of panic and indignation. I let out a weary sigh, a performance for an audience of one. Oh dear, I said, my voice laden with feigned confusion. The bank must have made a mistake. They told me they were flagging some unusual activity for security reasons. Don't you worry, son. I'll get it all sorted out. We can't be too careful these days. With all the fraud going on, my calm, slightly befuddled demeanor was the perfect psychological weapon. It denied them a clear enemy. They could not rage against a father who was seemingly trying to help them. My placidity was a form of water torture, each placating word another drop on their foreheads, designed to drive them mad with uncertainty and fear. They were architects of a conspiracy, suddenly finding themselves locked inside a building where the walls were silently closing in. Peterson's report arrived via a secure email link precisely 72 hours after our meeting. It was more damning than I had dared to hope. Amelia, it turned out, was not just an ambitious paralegal. She was a reckless one. There is a formal complaint filed against her by a former client at her law firm, alleging she had given unauthorized legal advice that had resulted in a significant financial loss. The firm was managing it internally, but it was a career-threatening vulnerability. Mark's situation was simpler and more pathetic. He was drowning in debt, having leveraged his expected inheritance to secure high-interest loans for a series of disastrous cryptocurrency investments. They were not just greedy, they were desperate. The report contained one other crucial piece of intelligence. Peterson had tracked their movements. They had met twice with a lawyer known for aggressive, often unscrupulous, elder law cases. They were not just planning a conservatorship, they were accelerating their timeline. They intended to strike, and strike soon, with a narrative of my supposed mental decline. The next move was theirs, and it was aimed at the person I cherished most, my daughter, Sarah. Amelia called her. Sarah recounted the conversation to me later that evening, her voice a careful, professional monotone that I knew masked a deep-seated anger. Amelia had been brilliant in a sickening sort of way. She had wept. She had spoken of her deep love for me and her profound concern. She told Sarah that I was becoming paranoid, that I was having delusions, that I had accused her and Mark of stealing from me. She painted a vivid picture of a great mind in its twilight, a man lost in the fog of grief, needing the loving, firm hand of his family to guide him. She was trying to recruit Sarah to turn my own daughter into a witness for their fabricated prosecution. But she had misjudged her target. Sarah was not just my daughter. She was a clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience in spotting manipulation and personality disorders. She was textbook, Sarah told me, her voice cold. Her emotional display was entirely performative. She was testing my reactions, looking for validation. What's really going on, Dad? It was time. I asked Sarah to come to the house. In the quiet of my office, the war room, I told her everything. I laid out the sequence of events, from the sight of the Mercedes to the investigator's report. Then, I played her the recording. I watched her face as the voices of her brother and sister-in-law filled the room, their casual cruelty and calculated greed laid bare. Her professional composure crumbled, replaced by a look of profound hurt, which quickly hardened into the same steely resolve I felt in my own gut. She did not cry. She simply listened, and when it was over, she looked at me and said, "What's the plan? How can I help?" In that moment, their strategy to isolate me failed spectacularly. They had not only failed to recruit my daughter, they had turned her into my most powerful ally. Her professional testimony regarding my mental state would be an insurmountable obstacle to their legal maneuvering. With Sarah on board, it was time for a preemptive strike. We could not wait for them to file their petition. We had to attack their credibility first. Armed with Peterson's report on Amelia's professional misconduct, my lawyer, David, drafted a carefully worded letter. It was sent not only to the managing partner of Amelia's firm, but also to the State Bar Association. The letter did not make accusations of conspiracy. It simply stated that we had uncovered evidence of potentially unethical behavior concerning her handling of a former client and that, due to her involvement in a developing family financial dispute, we felt it was our duty to report it for their review. It was a surgical strike designed to place her under immediate professional scrutiny. It would force her and her firm onto the back foot, consuming their resources and attention. It was a signal that we were not the confused, passive victims they expected. We were armed, and we were firing back. Their response was exactly as I had predicted, predictable and desperate. A week later, I was served with a petition for conservatorship. They had been forced to accelerate their flawed plan. The hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks. The documents were a work of fiction, a collection of half-truths and outright lies woven together to portray me as an incompetent old man. They cited my freezing of the accounts as an act of paranoia, my transfer to the charitable foundation as evidence of fiscal insanity, and included a sworn affidavit from their hired gun, Dr. Evans, attesting to my cognitive decline based on a single, manipulated conversation he'd had with me at a family function. They were coming at me with everything they had. They were about to discover I had been holding my own arsenal in reserve. The day of the hearing was overcast, the sky the color of slate. I felt an odd sense of calm as I sat beside David and Sarah at the defendant's table. Mark and Amelia sat opposite us, their expressions a carefully crafted blend of sorrow and resolve. They looked every bit the concerned family, forced into a terrible but necessary action. They had underestimated me at every turn, and that arrogance was about to be their undoing. Their case went first. Amelia took the stand, her performance worthy of an award. She spoke in hushed, respectful tones about my brilliance as an architect and a father, which only made my alleged decline all the more tragic. She recounted fabricated stories of my confusion, of my getting lost on familiar roads, of my angry, paranoid accusations. Tears welled in her eyes as she begged the court to let them step in, to protect me from myself. Mark followed, his testimony less polished but equally insidious. He spoke of my legacy and his profound fear that I would squander it in my grief-stricken state. He cried. They were convincing. I could feel the judge's sympathy shifting toward them. Then it was our turn. David called only one witness to the stand before me. Sarah. She sat there, a beacon of professional calm and credibility. She systematically dismantled their narrative, not with emotion, but with clinical precision. As a psychologist who had known me her entire life and had spent significant time with me recently, she testified that I was not only competent, but mentally acute in processing my grief in a healthy, constructive manner. She explained the psychological tactics of manipulation and gaslighting, drawing a clear, damning line to Amelia's attempts to influence her. Their case began to look less like a rescue mission and more like a hostile takeover. Finally, it was time for David's cross-examination of Amelia. He let her reiterate her claims, her deep concern, her pure motives. He led her, step by step, further into her web of lies. Then he paused, his gaze fixed on her. "Mistress Peterson," he said, using her formal name, "you testified that your only motivation is to protect your father-in-law's well-being and assets. Is that correct?" "Yes, of course," she said, her voice firm. "And you have no personal financial interest in this matter?" None whatsoever, she lied, looking directly at the judge. David walked slowly back to our table and picked up a small digital audio player. Your Honor, he said, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom, we have one final piece of evidence. It is a recording of a conversation that took place on the afternoon of May 17th of this year, a conversation that speaks directly to the petitioner's true motivations. He pressed play. The sound of Amelia's voice, crisp and clear, filled the room. Her voice, followed by my son's. Their entire conspiracy, their entire plan to have me declared incompetent, to seize my assets, to sell my company, to plunder my life, echoed off the courtroom walls. I watched their faces. The color drained from Mark's instantly, replaced by a pasty, greenish pallor. Amelia's mask of composure shattered, her expression twisting into one of pure, unadulterated horror. They were exposed, their rotten foundation laid bare for the world to see. When the recording finished, a profound silence descended. The judge stared at Mark and Amelia, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not need to deliberate. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a rifle shot. Petition denied. With extreme prejudice, he boomed. I am referring this entire matter, including the testimony given here today, to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into conspiracy to commit fraud and perjury. The aftermath was not a celebration. It was a demolition. The DA filed charges within a month. Amelia was summarily fired, and the state bar initiated disbarment proceedings, which she lost. Mark's creditors, no longer placated by the prospect of a future inheritance, called in their loans, forcing him into bankruptcy. Their friends vanished. Their carefully constructed world imploded, leaving them in a crater of their own making. I finalized the legal work to disinherit my son, a joyless but necessary procedure, like amputating a gangrenous limb. I sold the family house, its memories too deeply stained, and used a portion of the proceeds to establish the Eleanor Vance Foundation, dedicated to funding arts education for underprivileged students. I moved into a penthouse apartment in a building I had designed years ago, its clean lines and panoramic views a balm for my soul. My relationship with Sarah became the cornerstone of my new life, a bond of love and trust that had been tested and proven to be stronger than steel. I never spoke to my son again. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes, late at night, I stand at the vast window of my new home, looking out at the city lights, a sprawling, intricate system that I understand. I had survived a betrayal that should have destroyed me. I had responded not with rage, but with structure. I had become the architect of my own vindication, demolishing a corrupted part of my life to build something stronger, something quieter, something at peace.